All right, so now we want to bring in Jonathan Ruhe with JINSA. He is going to break this all down for us here, joining us now on Live Now from Fox. Thank you so much for taking the time and for standing by for us, really, as we were listening in there to President Trump. We appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We just witnessed history unfold here. We saw President Trump signing that Gaza peace deal. I think one of the questions that our viewers might have here is, what exactly does that signify? What does that peace deal entail?
So that's the million-dollar question. We've heard it largely described in two phases. Trump flew to Israel and then to Egypt today to celebrate the first phase, which is currently underway, essentially the exchange of the living hostages and presumably all the bodies of the deceased hostages in exchange for the release of prisoners held in Israeli prisons, and then also the pullback of the Israel Defense Forces to a more withdrawn position, but still in key parts of Gaza. So that's what's happened so far. That general trade-off has been, everyone's understood that for a long time now. It was actually getting both sides to agree to it that was so monumental today. And then phase two, the phase that's yet to come, where we actually know a lot less about it, it still has to be hammered out through tough diplomacy, is how do you have a post-Hamas future in Gaza such that the threat from Gaza like Hamas can never happen again, and you never get something again like October 7th and the taking of all these hostages.
Right, and I want to get into all of that here with you, but just going back to this breaking news here for a moment here, as we are learning here that Israel bringing 4 hostages' bodies out of Gaza right now. As I shared here before I brought you in, we did have that statement once again from the Hostage Families Forum saying something must be done about this. Going forward, can we expect there to be any difficulty, I guess, when it comes to maintaining this ceasefire if the remaining bodies are not returned?
I certainly think I would caution the viewers here to build that into their expectations, that as important as today is for what's already happened, again, the road ahead is very uncertain. We've certainly seen previous attempts at a ceasefire resolution fall apart for various reasons. And I think now that you have reports of Hamas not returning all of the bodies suggests that while Hamas did agree to the ceasefire in order to get a withdrawal of Israeli forces and an end to the current military conflict, certainly Hamas is now willing to see what else they can try to get out of the ceasefire and withholding those bodies, trying to shape the negotiations we're talking about going forward into this phase two. And in that sense, sadly, it's nothing new.
And as you just said, Jonathan, we did hear from President Trump a little bit earlier saying the phase 2 negotiations now underway. What can we expect here as President Trump meets with these world leaders at this peace summit? We did hear the president say he is going to be speaking with them privately away from the media. So what can we expect those conversations to look like today?
So I certainly expect and I hope that the president will use this forum to continue a lot of the diplomacy that he and his team did, including through back channels that got us to today in the first place, which is a combination of cajoling and flattery, which we certainly heard in his speech, and then also some tough arm twisting. That includes both our Arab partners and Arab countries that Trump is certainly very close with, Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar. We heard him call all those countries out favorably by name in the speech, but also Israel. This is going to require President Trump to get these countries, especially our Arab partners, to agree to something that they have not yet so far, which is to put some very real skin in the game and to help not only with the reconstruction and humanitarian situation in Gaza, but also helping with the much more difficult fundamental question of what do you do with a territory like Gaza that's been ruled by Hamas for decades, which will need to be, frankly, de-radicalized, which is a generational project. And also, how do you stand up a viable government to replace Hamas? Because there are certainly fragments or rudiments of that inside Gaza, but this has been framed in the larger context of a future Palestinian state and autonomy. And currently, I think there's a lack of Palestinian leadership to help that. So that's where the rubber is going to have to meet the road here, and Trump's going to have to continue showing diplomatic leadership in that regard.
It's also worth noting here that Israel and Hamas not attending the summit. We did learn a little bit earlier today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not attending the summit. So without those two representatives there, how much can really get done here today in terms of talks?
Yeah, I think it's more than just optics. I think there is a substantive point, as you note. I don't expect a lot of definitive conclusions to come out of the talks today. You know, this is as much a photo op and an important message that's being sent diplomatically, but the hard work is yet to come. I certainly understand why Prime Minister Netanyahu is not there today. One is because he would be next to the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, whom Trump called out by name, but that's fraught with a lot of political considerations for the Israeli leader. But also, you know, I think in terms of rebuilding Gaza, in terms of having a viable phase two, you know, to the extent Israel is involved, it will be very much a backseat role. This is sort of, as I mentioned, much more of a task and a purpose for American diplomatic leadership and our other Middle East partners on the ground to really get involved.
Jonathan, we did get in some viewer questions here, and thank you to our viewers who wrote in because we did get a good amount of them. So I do want to get some of those questions answered here. So let's head to this one. Is this peace plan considered as a step for a Palestinian state?
So I think it's a very good question. I think the way, and again, a lot of it is vague about the phase two or what comes next, because, you know, Trump, I think, sort of inverted the usual diplomatic process. He said, let's get the ceasefire before we have all these other final questions answered, because by getting the ceasefire, we'll sort of lock things into place and then force people to work off of those new facts that fait accompli. Certainly, I think the way we've seen the proposal phrased, it leaves open and intentionally vague the prospect of a political horizon for the Palestinians. I don't think you would have gotten much Arab buy-in to agree to this plan if there wasn't some concession, frankly, in that regard. But sort of as I mentioned with the issue of de-radicalization and Palestinian governance, it very much is a horizon. It's nothing in the near term. And frankly, to get progress between here and there, there's a lot of other steps that need to happen first.
And another viewer question that we got in here that I was actually going to ask you, because again, there's a lot of questions here, as you just said, about what phase two is going to look like. So Stephen wrote in this question saying, how will reconstruction financing, resource allocation, and economic sovereignty be structured? What safeguards prevent dependency or external Hamas capture? Can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I don't have any concrete answer based on the public discussions we've seen. I certainly have strong views on this, which is this is really where a lot of our Arab partners can and should play a leading role. Partly that's Egypt, because they control the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Sinai, which is a major through point, not only for people, but also more importantly for aid and reconstruction assistance. And then also more importantly, a lot of our Gulf Arab partners, Saudi Arabia, UAE, people that Trump made sure to mention by name in his speech just now, they have a lot of resources and a lot of experience and a lot of ambition to help in a lot of these regards. But, you know, as our viewer asked in his question, I think very pointedly, you know, the question of sovereignty, because Hamas has given no indication that they think they lost. Their view of victory is we survived, we're still here amid the rubble, and you see Hamas already starting to reassert its control on the ground in parts of Gaza where the IDF has withdrawn from. And then also, as we mentioned at the outset, this with potentially withholding some of the deceased hostages' bodies. These are all signs that Hamas is not going to let a new future come into Gaza lightly. They'll fight it every way they can, including violently. So again, this makes it all the more incumbent upon President Trump to show continued leadership and for our partners to really put some skin in the game.
I did want to get to one other question here from Carla, is saying, how does the two-state proposal fit in now?
So, you know, I think two-state proposal is probably an overstatement, not to pick words. You know, I think, look, after October 7th, the one thing that unified all Israelis in a country where there's often a lot of political disagreement and division is that, you know, none of them, from the most left to the right, can really foresee how you could ever have a Palestinian state where Hamas or even the Palestinian Authority has a realistic chance of playing the leadership role there. So again, I think it's intentionally framed in terms of things like horizon. It's a very telling metaphor. This is not anything like the 90s where you have negotiators going and hammering out specific details, like who will swap land where, whether refugees will return, who controls customs revenue, stuff like that. That's light years away. So I think that's the end of the successful implementation of this plan is starting to get fidelity on questions like that. Right now, we're much more in the realm of very brass tacks, immediate term stuff, humanitarian aid, reconstruction, and making sure Hamas doesn't reassert itself on the ground in Gaza as the IDF pulls out.
Right. And going off of that, just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. You just mentioned Hamas, and I think one of the questions surrounds how they will be disarmed and what are the challenges and potential solutions for disarming Hamas, and really how crucial is this going to be when it comes to maintaining a long-term peace?
Yeah, I think it's the core of the issue because you can't do any of these other things with reconstruction or humanitarian assistance if Gaza is plunged back into chaos or if Hamas controls who does what where in terms of reconstruction or humanitarian assistance. We've already seen that in recent months. Certainly I think one option that we've seen tried, although not very executed very well, is having private security contractors who've been vetted to distribute the aid and also to provide basic security functions. Controlling the distribution of reconstruction assistance, manning prisons with Hamas in it, things like that. But I think, based on proposals I've seen so far, there's talk of, various Arab partner nations getting involved. I'm worried about that only because Hamas would like nothing better than to pick a fight with those countries and to turn Gaza once more into a morass. And frankly, from Hamas's perspective, I think they're okay with a return to direct conflict with Israel because Hamas knows unfairly, but very truly, that Israel will be blamed for any return to conflict at this point. And so I think that's sort of a loaded question, $1 million question that, again, still needs to be hammered out in further discussions, because right now, as I mentioned, Hamas certainly does not think they're defeated.
My last question for you here, as we've watched all of this unfold, we do know once again President Trump saying the Part 2 negotiations now underway. He's currently meeting with world leaders. When can we expect an update on where all of this goes from here?
So I would certainly hope we'll get some official statements coming out of the president's trip that we're seeing currently, at the very least, to indicate some initial steps going forward. Because, as I mentioned, there's so much to be done. The important thing is to continue progress in any form, continue exerting the diplomatic leadership that President Trump has that got us to this point today, which even a couple weeks ago, frankly, might have seemed unimaginable. Trump said, enough is enough, let's get a peace. And now he has to continue saying, enough is enough, let's fix these other problems and go through with this. But I think realistically, to set expectations, we're talking about weeks, months, and ultimately probably years before we get, before we know the full outcome of this, which is not to say that there shouldn't be a sense of urgency. I think, going forward, we'll need to see President Trump getting countries like Egypt and countries that have frankly been less helpful, like Turkey and Qatar, actually begin to be helpful and prove what they claim to be, which is U.S. partners. Trump was able to work on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last month to twist some arms, things like that. He'll need to continue doing that. So I think we could hopefully see a more abrupt and unexpected positive diplomatic gains. So I would say to everyone, continue to be prepared and hopeful that we'll continue to see things like that. Because again, to reiterate one more time, this is going to be a very long, very difficult and uncertain process. And as amazing as today is, now the hard part begins.
Absolutely. Again, the ceasefire is still very fragile here at this hour. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us and for answering our viewer questions. And thank you to our viewers for writing in those questions. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.